Welcome to all of you that are here with us today for Dr. Susan Baumgaertel. I hope I am saying your last name right. You can correct me. Thank you. Today we are going to discuss menopause, and if you have any questions for Dr. Susan, you can put them in the chat. We have so much information that she is going to share with us, and I will turn it over to her to discuss.
Oh, thank you so much, Allie. And happy Women's History Month, everybody. This is a pleasure to kind of bring in the very tail end of the month. And I'm delighted to be here, and so delighted for the Long Beach Public Library to ask me here. And I guess your theme this year is celebrating women who tell our stories. And so I'll get back to that in a minute. Wanted to give you a brief bio about me. So I'm a physician in internal medicine, and this is actually my 30th year as a physician. And what better day than today, which is National Doctors Day. So woohoo. I've been in private practice, clinical practice, that seems like forever, until just a year or so ago when I stepped out and started my own business. But I took care of men and women, all ages, definitely a lot more women, and talked about menopause pretty much every day. I developed a program called Mini for Change, which ran for 7 years, and it was a weight management wellness program, which was really fun. And then also developed my website, Menopause Menu, which was my pandemic response to stress. It's like my passion project, and it's free for all. It's kind of an information hub. And then my business, which is my MD Advocate's been going now for 1 year. So it's really great. I'm in Seattle, Washington, trained at UW, University of Washington, got my degree there. My previous undergraduate degree was in architecture and urban planning. So a little different twist. I am writing a book. So maybe at some point I'll be asked back to do a book club with you all. So I did want to share my screen very briefly, see if the tech works here. So give me a second. And so you should be seeing my Menopause Mini website. Give me a thumbs up, Allie, if you can see that. Woohoo, yeah. So this is a website that's free for all, and it's meant as an information resource. If you scroll down, of course, you can see my mugshot, and then there's like a blog articles. But the point of showing you this was to go back up here, not to get dizzy, and go to the information page, because this is where kind of the meat of the matter is. And so let's say you wanted to go and look at, oh, there's like mental health. Oops, sorry. Obviously, I can't do my own website. Other information page, many ways to get to it. So mental health section is something that may apply to a lot of people as you go through menopause. Like, am I going crazy? What's going on? So look at all this. We have all these blog posts. It goes on and on. There's videos, lots of different videos. There's information about things I've collected from colleagues and from the web, and then kind of like a wild card, things that are kind of fun. Another good section to go to, like a lot of people, weight gain is an issue. So, oh gosh, this is something I say all the time. If I had a dime for every time I heard someone in perimenopause say, oh my gosh, I eat better than ever and I'm exercising, where did that 10 pounds come from? So I do remember that souffle. It was from a beautiful Maximilian restaurant here in Seattle, delicious. But scrolling past that scrumptious delight, you can see the blog posts again. You can see the videos, lots of videos, and other kind of choice items. So I'm going to stop sharing. Just wanted to kind of show you that website, because that's a resource for everyone, not just women, but men in our lives, anyone who knows a woman, which is pretty much anyone on the planet, almost. And it's something that's kind of building over time. So I did want to invite everyone to put their emails in the chat if they feel comfortable, if they want to stay connected with me, or you can always go to that website and send me a link. And then also put where you're watching from. I'm in Seattle. I know Allie's in New York. So if you're from somewhere else, be nice to give yourself a shout out. I did want to give a disclaimer that my comments today are not meant to be personal comments as your physician. So if you have issues, please consult your own physician. And then I wanted to zip right in because I think before we talk about menopause, before we get into these questions about menopause, it's really important that we kind of have a common ground in terms of definitions. So many people have heard of premenopause or postmenopause or perimenopause or menopause. But what does that really mean? And I think it's important just to take 1 minute now and to really define those. So pre means before. It means the time periods before menopause. You could be 15, you could be 19. Peri means around. So it's around the time of menopause. Things are changing. Maybe you have some symptoms. Maybe the periods are getting a little wonky. You're not sure what's going on. And then menopause is really like the last period, although you don't really know that, because to be truly menopause is 12 months without a period. From then on, you're postmenopause. And that's where a lot of people get this little hitch, like, well, I'm 70, menopause doesn't apply. You're postmenopause until you pass away. So those are the definitions I think that are really important to think about. And there are variations on a theme in terms of like surgical menopause or premature ovarian insufficiency and so forth. That's kind of the nutshell of menopause terms. So I know we're going to get into a lot of juicy stuff about things like hot flashes and night sweats and weight and you name it, but I'm going to pass the baton back to Allie. And so we'll maybe start with some of the questions and we'll see how it goes. Feel free to put some things into the chat as we go along.
Thank you so much. Yes, we have a lot of questions to get to, so let's kick it off. A lot of these have come from my network of women that are in the throes of perimenopause, menopause at this time. And many of the symptoms of menopause are difficult or embarrassing to talk about, which means many women are suffering symptoms and not seeking treatment. How do you recommend we address this issue?
Oh, wow. Start off with a big bang. And that actually probably was the impetus for the title, Much Ado About Menopause, Much Ado, think about Shakespeare. Are we still stuck in Shakespearean times here? Oh, come on. Women need a bit more information. And I think that we need to tell our stories. And that can be a challenge when you don't have access or you don't have the information, or maybe you're just not, maybe it's embarrassing to talk about some things like you said. So I think that you do need to seek out physicians who will listen. Now that's easier said than done. And I think that that's a huge issue now in terms of accessing primary care. And that's probably a whole nother hour talk. But, many physicians are just kind of grab and go. You have 5 minutes, you talk, you're out of the door. And I think the dilemma is, when you have other things that are important, menopause can kind of fall to the background because okay, don't want to talk about my vaginal dryness today, or, I don't talk about my fatigue because what doesn't cause fatigue? But all these symptoms are valid. And so I think finding someone who can actually listen, hear you and see you. And sometimes you have to, dare I say the word doctor shop, but you have to kind of, if you're not satisfied that someone's listening to you, you really have to switch gears if you can. And I know not everyone has that privilege. So a little side note, workplaces, I think, need to be a bit more supportive. That's an understatement about women going through midlife. Good God, if we have to, obviously dress in layers, but a lot of women I know have little fans by their desk or around their neck, and so be respectful. I think that education is power, knowledge is power. So that's part of what we're doing here today, and perhaps what certain books out there and certain websites can educate all in terms of what we're going through. And, one last comment on that, it occurred to me, we don't shame our children when they go through puberty, right? But gosh, shouldn't we afford women that same luxury, that rite of passage as they're going through menopause? Think about that for a second. I think that's kind of profound. So we need to respect ourselves. Others need to respect us. We also need to show others that, we can handle certain things. It doesn't have to be everyone's story. But I just hope that gets your head spinning a bit.
It sure does. And then as a follow-up to that, in researching for today, I came upon the North American Menopause Society. Are there organizations or professional organizations that we may be able to find more willing, supportive practitioners? Are there any pathways that you recommend to finding people that will support this?
Yeah, again, great question. I'm actually a member of NAMS, North American Menopause Society, NAMS, and I'm not certified necessarily. I didn't choose to because it wasn't something I felt I needed to do. And although they're an excellent resource, and I've had clients who work with me, patients who work with me now in my telemedicine business who found me through NAMS, and they've really benefited from my medical coaching sessions around menopause. I think that you have to put the pause button because I've also heard some patients who have said, well, I've been to NAMS, I've read the articles, but all I see is a whole bunch of stuff on hormones. Now, of course, it's much more than hormones, but this really comes down to what I think is almost the fundamental truth of almost any question here, is it has to be individualized. And so, of course, we have societies, we have organizations or great websites that are trying to put out information in a very positive way and palatable way for the general public. But sometimes you can get a little kind of down that slippery slope where it seems like every article you're reading is about hormones, and maybe you're not interested in hormones, or maybe you are, and it's just not giving you enough information. So I think, again, that's where you have to have a bit of a discerning touch when you look at this. So NAMS is a good resource. Again, I pull back to say, find someone who is interested in you, interested in listening to you, interested in hearing about you as an individual, not seeing you as a statistic. And I think that that's, they're still up and coming organizations. I hope my page is one of them. I hope my book is one of them. But I think you have to shop around. You'll shop around for when you buy a car, right? I mean, who's going to buy a car nowadays? You have to be kind of crazy with the prices. But when you buy a car, you shop around, you do your homework, you test drive, you do stuff. Well, you can't really test drive a new physician, but you get my point. You can really start to decide, does this person listen to me? And I think that's key.
That is great advice. And since you did mention hormones, I think there are a bunch of questions that we have here that relate to that. Do you need to be in full menopause before beginning HRT? Do you recommend doing blood testing? And how long is it recommended to be on HRT if that is the path that you decide to choose?
Yeah. I'm going to implode a 2-hour talk into 3 minutes.
Right. I know this is the nitty gritty right here.
But so the challenge is mine to kind of keep it straightforward. I believe that unfortunately, everyone probably by now has heard about the Women's Health Initiative that was back in the 2000s, 2003, 2004, et cetera. And there was some damage done to the whole concept of hormones being safe. Yes, they are safe. Not everyone can be on hormones. Not everyone wants to be on hormones. But for those women who want to be on hormones, well, hormones actually can start way before menopause. It's called birth control pills, right? They take there's hormones there. They regulate our periods. For some women, they stop the periods. So a lot of women have been on hormones, whether they have an IUD, intrauterine device, that's embedded in their uterus, and then fortunately they're expanding the time frame you can have those. Or there's a patch, so there's different hormone therapies that don't necessarily pertain to menopause per se, but as you drift into menopause, or even further into menopause, becoming postmenopause, then I think that again, it's individual. If you have symptoms that are pretty minimal, that are very tolerable, that don't impact your quality of life, that you can manage, you don't need to be on hormones. It's not something that you have to, I better be on hormones or my bones are going to crumble, or I better be on hormones or my brain health is going to suffer. So it's not the be all end all. On the flip side, that's often the best time for women who are having great difficulties with menopausal symptoms to get on hormones, because I think the data so far that we know, again, research is ongoing, the data will suggest that up until age 60, so start earlier is, don't wait until you're 58, but if you're on hormones up until 60-ish is probably a fair game in terms of very low risks. Again, different populations have different risk groups. I'm not even talking about people who have like genetic predisposition for breast cancer and so forth, or for stroke or heart disease. But so again, loosey-goosey answer, but I think that one of the important points too is that you don't need a blood test to prove that you're going through menopause. There was a day where, oh gosh, any woman in their late 40s, early 50s, boom, I ordered an FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone. And if it was low, I'd say, oh, you're not in menopause. And if it was high or mid-range, I'd say, well, you're almost there. Well, that was probably false information, first of all, because that number can change, and it's not just one moment in time. But unless you are going through premature menopause, you're 38, your periods have stopped. Whoa, what's going on? Something's wrong. Or you're having, just horrendous trouble controlling your periods, and you're hemorrhaging all the time. You're actually anemic, and there are reasons to think about, like, well, what are your hormones doing, and what's, is this really menopause? let's say you have hot flashes. Well, if it's not menopause, there are many other things that can cause hot flashes. What about your thyroid? There are other endocrine diseases. There are cancers. So it's a mishmash of kind of decision making. Again, finding a doctor that listens to you, that can understand you, that is interested in you, and not just doing a blood test, because that's not the be all end all.
That is wonderful information. And something that you did mention to follow up, are there certain symptoms that are easier to control with holistic measures than others? Is there, I guess, kind of like a baseline for what we should be trying to do holistically before we enter into this hormone conversation?
Yeah, well, I think it's worth spending just a moment on this subject, which is near and dear to me. I think that holistic measures, alternatives is not kind of in vogue anymore, but holistic support of menopause is so valid. And I think that it doesn't have to be either or, and it doesn't have to be like start and stop. So you can integrate them well before you're even thinking about menopause or well into your 80s. So it's just the whole concept of holistic care and holistic support doesn't have to be geared just to this time frame. But again, it kind of gets back to that theme you're going to hear a lot from me, which is it's individualized. And so there's some women who really, really get benefit from Chinese herbs or herbal medicine or acupuncture, or they do meditation and mindfulness techniques, or cognitive behavioral kind of therapy, or they take supplements or things that are not kind of Western medicine origin. And so there's nothing wrong with any of that if it's helpful, if it's done in a way that is not harmful. And if it's done with the same knowledge of like, is this helping me? If it's not, why am I doing it? So I think that that's imperative. Some people just knee-jerk reach for a supplement or reach for a remedy. Oh, my sister did it, my girlfriend or my colleague at work did it. It may not work for you. Maybe you're the one who really doesn't need hormones. So again, there's a push me, pull you there. And I think that, again, getting back to that individualized approach is so key.
Would you recommend certain supplements more than others? Are there certain things or certain supplements that control certain symptoms that you have found have more efficacy?
Yeah, I would say I never push products, so I'll just kind of speak in generalities. I would say that there are plant-based soy products, for instance, or phytoestrogens, or things that are from plant origin that can be very supportive for some women, and for others, it didn't work. Certainly very, very safe to try. I do believe that, and dare I say this whole kind of snake oil industry, there's trillions of dollars being pumped into menopause, which is now an industry where buyer beware. And I think that unfortunately, you can just get the latest, greatest potion, pill, salve, ointment, whatever, and you're making someone rich, and it's not really supporting you. So I think you have to be very discerning. There are some things that are kind of indirectly supportive, even though you wouldn't normally think about them at the top of your list, like vitamin D, for example. There's a lot of literature looking at vitamin D as being supportive to our inflammatory or immune systems. Well, guess what? When you're going through menopause, there's a lot of inflammation stuff happening. And so if we can improve that aspect of our health, that's bingo. Not to mention the whole conversation about chronic illness. Think about osteoporosis or osteopenia, which is early of osteoporosis. Vitamin D is essential in that kind of calcium bone mineral metabolism equation. So a lot of value for that. Does that mean that we have to just go popping vitamin D everywhere? Well, not necessarily. I think where I live in Seattle, most people are D deficient, and sadly, but there are some, again, like with any supplement or something that even gives you value, too much can be not a good thing. So for instance, vitamin D, if your levels go too high, you can precipitate kidney stones. Who wants a kidney stone? I don't. So again, knowledge is important. Don't just shovel in supplements because it sounds good. Take it with a purpose. I will say there's another kind of spin-off question. What about the whole kind of microbiome? And that's a very, very hot topic. Research is all over that. Maybe in 5 years, I'll have a fountain of knowledge. But I do feel that the microbiome support, which is kind of in our gut, our GI tract. That is linked. Now we're just getting early teaser studies that talk about the microbiome and Alzheimer's or our mental health, cognitive decline and dementia. I bet you that there's more information that we will be finding out about the microbiome support and inflammation and hot flashes and menopause and all those things that are kind of swirling around. So yeah, does it mean that we all have to go out and get some, probiotic supplements? Not necessarily. It may be helpful, maybe not helpful, actually. A recent article, I can't remember which lay press showed that. But, getting back to my favorite topic when we talk about weight in a minute, nutritional support of your microbiome. So fermented foods. We have in Seattle, a company, Firefly Kitchens. She's just fantastic. And you can get her kraut. She makes kraut. I grew up in a partly German household where we had sauerkraut on things. Gone are this, there's so many different kinds of kraut now. So fermented foods, krauts, kefir, there are things that can be very supplemental to your gut microbiome and support your gut. And I think that that's getting away from popping a bunch of pills.
Excellent. Very helpful. And you did mention weight. And I feel like that may be what a lot of us are struggling with. Do you want to just kind of discuss that? Diet, exercise, putting on 10 pounds, even though we're drinking less, working out more, eating mostly plants. How can we avoid this?
Yeah, I would say that weight is probably my favorite topic. My entire career in medicine, not a day would go by where I would not have usually a woman come in and say, oh my God, this is frustrating. I'm working out at the gym and I'm eating really healthy, that word healthy. And, like it's always in the middle, like, where the heck did this come from? This is really frustrating to me. No, you can't target body parts. You can't just lose weight in a certain body part. So that's kind of sad news. But I do think that holding back, let's look at the 20,000 foot view first, because when you think about weight management, these principles hopefully are in the forefront long before you're thinking about menopause, because by the time we're getting into perimenopause and menopause and beyond, then that's when you should be kind of doubling down on some of these basic fundamental principles that are very helpful for weight management. So for instance, there's a lot of newer data looking, well, not new, but contributing newer data looking at, how our brains work and how they are driving our habits. And so you mentioned diet and exercise. Not a single doc on the planet won't talk about diet and exercise. If you see a cardiologist, they're going to say diet and exercise. It's the mantra. But what does that really mean? I know people who are marathon runners and maybe put my diet to shame and they can't lose weight. So it's not just about diet and exercise. Of course, you can't ignore it. So I think flipping that a bit, and instead of jumping right into that mantra, focus first on sleep and stress. I think those two things are so, like people pay lip service to them a little bit, like stressed. Like, oh, I sleep this tired. I have 3 kids, but if we could make inroads on improving stress management and improving sleep quality, and then of course, quantity, absolutely, you would have far greater success with weight management, because guess what? The cortisol, that hormone that's kind of, fight or flight, that's jacked up your whole insulin response, insulin sensitivity, people who are having kind of metabolic issues related to their, their systems not functioning well or slowing down, so to speak. A lot of that can be addressed by improving our stress and sleep. And so I think of weight loss truly as a side effect of all these other intentional changes. So if you're gunning just to lose 10 pounds or just to lose 20 pounds, I shouldn't say just, it'd be very difficult to do that, and that's your goal, that's not going to work. Well, I think no one needs to hear that, because they already know that. Anyone who's tried to lose weight aggressively, it comes right back. Even bariatric surgeons, as much as they do some great work surgically, will admit that a lot of people will rebound because they haven't addressed those brain side of the intentional changes arena. So I did want to actually share my screen one more time, because this is really pertinent for folks who are interested. Let's get that back up again. This time it's going to be my YouTube channel. And thumbs up, Allie, if you can see that. Great, perfect. So the reason I pulled this up is I did a lecture and it was just done in December. And it was what I've learned from running a weight management and wellness program for 7 years. I won't play it, obviously, but it's 45 minutes. I know that's a long period of time. Who has time these days? But I really summarized my approach to my Menu for Change program, which was a 7-year program, which addressed weight management and wellness. And in it, I think you'll be able to get some nuggets in terms of what I was just talking about. I'll stop sharing my screen so everybody can see me. So again, I think that if we could pull away from, oh, if I just don't eat all of these things, or if I do eat all these things, I'll be svelte and beautiful and wonderful, or, because that is a slippery slope that gets into body image. Yes, it gets into disordered eating. That gets into patterns that are not healthy and not sustainable. And so that's the last thing you want to introduce, that kind of thought process, as you're dealing with all this other, oh my God, I'm going into menopause, because there's so much going on that it becomes a little overwhelming. And so I think if we can kind of stick to, get yourself to stick to some of these basic principles, you'll do much better in terms of that weight equation.
That may be the best advice I think any of us will take away from this, because I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think we're looking for this easy solution, and it's really a whole body solution. And because we're women, and I think a lot of us are mothers, the sleep and the stress is constant. And getting to the root of that may be what helps us feel better physically and emotionally.
Yeah,
so
no,
thank you for that.
I think, and that's why, I think when people see my Menopause Mini website, they'll see that the content under sleep and stress is huge. And they go to maybe something like, night sweats. It's like, oh, there's not much here, because you know what? The answers are not there. And so if you go back to the sleep and the stress, or back to the stress management, mental health categories, that is where you need to put your quality time, energy, and effort in. And I do think it's, again, these buzzwords of, self and self-love and self-care. Some people just go, oh God, I'm tired of that, and I'm not saying just go do yoga for an hour, but it's what makes you feel good. If it means in the middle of the day going out for a 5-minute walk and looking at a tree, or maybe you look at a plant, in your office and you don't have a tree, or something that just kind of gets you out of your element, that allows you to relax for a minute. It sounds really hokey, but that you just did a little few minutes of stress management. If we can do more of that and feel less like we have to be super women with a cape on every day, because we work, we have family, we have households, we have kids. I mean, honestly, some of our husbands may be gods, but, truly we do it all. And I think that we have to get that mantle off of us and say, we don't always have to do it all. And menopause is a time, I believe, this is midlife. This is a time for women to, what I say, kind of reclaim that inner wisdom, because we've been there, done that. Like maybe we've raised kids, or we're raising kids, or, we've had elderly parents perhaps who passed. And so we have a certain knowledge, a certain kind of, we've gotten to a certain point in our life where we often feel very successful. And then all that confidence is just like, poof, somehow kind of gets squished with all the things that we suddenly have to deal with when we're going through menopause. So take a moment to own that and to reclaim that is really powerful.
Yes, and that was something I was thinking of. It's like everything that we knew about ourselves and our bodies all of a sudden changes, and we don't have control over that. And it's a very frightening and upsetting thing to have all these things that used to work, and now it's not. And
yeah. And not to belabor this point, but it's really important, is that it's happened to me. It's probably happened to many of you who are watching, or people that where you have just lost your self-regulation, like a snap out, or you're really irritated, or you like fight. It's like, oh, I just said that. Oh my God, I didn't mean that. What just came out of my mouth? And so you just are not capable, where perhaps professionally you were, or even socially. And so this imbalance, it's not just a hormonal thing. Yes, of course, our estrogen may be going like this or eventually, down to nothing. So it's much more than just a hormonal reaction, but that's all going on. And so, of course, when we get a hot flash, it's like, oh my God, you're kidding me, not now. Well, just, learn to breathe through it. You can't control everything. You can't master everything. And I think that frustration level gets really high, and that just kind of seeps into a lot of aspects of our life. So very, very important to kind of drill down and bring that back close to home.
One more thing about the sleep, and I know that the sleep is in relation to the stress. And if you're stressed and you're not sleeping, if you're using, either melatonin or sleep aids, I'm going to assume that that's not really addressing the problem, but is it better than nothing to get the sleep?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with a sleep aid, but I'll put a caveat to that in a minute. So I do think that so many people across our country are wanting a pill, a pill for that. Like there's an app for that. They want a pill for that. I can't sleep. I need a pill. Yes, there are certain circumstances where you might need a medication. And I would prefer it wouldn't be one of those addictive ones where you become dependent on them. But frankly, so there's nothing wrong with someone who has to take a sleeping pill. But I would far rather look at the almost infinite number of ways that you can start to cultivate better sleep without relying on a pill. You did mention melatonin, and I think some people incorrectly see that as a sleeping pill, where really what it does, it kind of works with our circadian rhythm, which is that kind of 24-hour rhythm that we have. And so it's not, you don't take it right before bed. It doesn't make you drowsy. It doesn't put you to sleep. It doesn't drug you. You actually take it several hours before typically. So that's kind of one key point. And then, there's many, many doses. I think anything above 3 milligrams probably is not doing anything for you. So don't take high doses like, oh, 3's not working, I'm going to take 10. So again, that's just kind of a quick comment about melatonin. But so many folks are already very knowledgeable about something called sleep hygiene. Okay, we know the room should be dark. We know that, it should be quiet. We know that we shouldn't, be watching our screens in bed for an hour. We should, there's a lot of things we kind of already know that. Now, do we follow our advice? Not always. But I do think that beyond the sleep hygiene stuff, it is the valuation, the value that we place on sleep. When you have a kid that's young and not, 25, who needs your help, you're a mom, you're not going to say, oh, nope, I'm sleeping now, I need my quality of sleep. Of course not. You're going to be momming. So that's just one example of so many. In my profession, I was pageable day and night for 30 years. And so if someone called me at 2 o'clock in the morning because they had ear pain, and think like, are you kidding me? Ear pain? Why don't you call me at 7 when I'm up? So, so there's so many things that disrupt our sleep. Now, some are beyond our control, but sometimes we can start to get a little more control than we realize. My example of myself was even though I got up at 5:15 every day for a million years, my schedule shifted now. My husband's a night owl, and I go to bed fairly early compared to him, like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock a.m. I might go to bed at 10 or 10:30. That to me is kind of early. So I need to prepare myself, get my routine. So I'm kind of winding down at that time. So I'm not going to talk about taxes. I'm not going to talk about the home repair that's going on right now. You probably can't hear, there's pounding. I'm not going to talk about things that are really like, oh my gosh, it's something related to our daughter that makes me anxious because I'm a mom. No, I need to relax and get into that mode of anticipating sleep. That's different than just good sleep hygiene. So I belabored that point because I think that if we can get better sleep quality, then we don't have to be panicked so much about the quantity, because I think for decades, all I got was 5.5 hours, maybe 6 on a good night. That's ridiculous. So there's some people who can't even open their eyes. They can't function unless they have 9 hours of sleep. I'm jealous. So again, it's not that number necessarily, but if you can get quality sleep, that's going to get your systems to kind of respite overnight. I'm going to do a fast forward into something called intermittent fasting. A lot of people ask me questions about that when they talk about weight management. And I say, well, I know it's a trend and some people swear by it, but to me, that is another diet. And I don't like I dislike diets, 4-letter word. I think anything that forces you to do something on a schedule is less likely to be helpful in terms of the whole nutritional realm. And so, oh, nope, it's not 8 a.m. I told myself I can't eat until 8 a.m. Well, let's say you're hungry at 7, you're just starving for an hour. So again, that intentionality about like, oh, I'm going to try and get some restful sleep, because guess what? You're fasting at night. If you get a restful sleep and maybe don't eat too close to bed and too first thing in the morning, that's a fast. So intentionally getting quality sleep and setting those intentions, I think, are important. Not always feasible, but important to think about.
Very, very good advice. Is there anything that younger women can do to prepare, other than listening to their elders, which now we're all going to be very well versed in discussing this with our younger friends? But is there anything that they can do to kind of prepare for this?
I would
time?
say, get educated. And I don't mean to be rude to best friends, but don't always rely on your best friend or your neighbor or your work colleague, because remember that we go through these steps as individuals. And I can tell you just as many times, I guess life's a bell curve, right? I have some women who have said, like, I had one period that was kind of wonky and that was it. I had maybe one hot flash. It's like, don't say that loud, you're gonna get punched, And then other women is like, oh my God, I was 8 years of hell. And oh my God, I just didn't think I was ever going to survive. So, those are polar extremes. It's kind of like plane crashes. They're sensational, they're horrific, but look how many people fly in planes, and it's a boring flight, nothing happens. So, you just have to remember that it's a huge array. And just because you really love your best friend or your sister, or your aunt or your mother, doesn't mean that their experience is going to be your experience. That's the first kind of point. And don't panic about it. And I think that, again, this is kind of it sounds so simplistic, but think ahead of time about those healthful behaviors, about intentionally, if you have habits, to try and trick your brain or train your brain, retrain your brain to do things a little differently. One example I'll put out there, which is really, again, it gets back to weight, but there's many analogies, is the concept of food as addiction or food as addictive and sugar. And I did a lot of research in talking about that in the past 10, 15 years. And, when you have like a sweet treat, the dopamine pathways in your brain light up. And it's like you've just gotten a street drug. I mean, it's really impressive, the MRI data looking at this. Well, it gets to the point where you can just even look at a package of something that has something really sweet, and then that cycle's going again, right? So if you're trying to work, for instance, you're well before menopause, you're thinking like, God, I've been trying to lose the same 10 pounds. Oh my gosh, I'm getting close to menopause. Now I'm freaking out because I don't want to gain 10 more pounds. This is crazy. Again, start working ahead of time on those changes that will impact your habits, that will impact your day-to-day. And then you're not shaming yourself. You're not giving yourself rigid principles like, oh, I will never eat sugar again. I think that's a little ridiculous. But you're starting to recognize patterns and habits, and then you start to change those. That sets the stage for easier methods of changing other habits, be it sleep or exercise, which we haven't even talked about. So I think that that's the key as you're getting into this kind of zone, or if you're before that zone.
And since you mentioned exercise, why don't we hit that one next?
Yeah. Well, of course, exercise is good for everything, right? But, if we talk about sleep and stress, bingo, it really is one of the pillars of how to improve stress management. And I went, this program I mentioned, Menu for Change, which ran for 7 years, I moved away. It sounds a little loosey-goosey, I know, but I moved away from using the word exercise and talked about movement, because I think exercise to some, it sounds almost punitive, like, oh, we got to go pound it out the gym. And like, oh my God, I've only done 20. I told myself I do 25 minutes, like, keep doing it, keep doing it. It's almost like you're punishing yourself. And then, by the way, if it took you 40 minutes to get out the door and change and drive and park and go in and change and get, that's like a huge hassle. So I think about more as movement. Like, I'm in my second floor home office. My laundry's on the first floor. So become the most inefficient person. Don't take the whole damn thing and almost trip on the stairs. Take little bits. You're going up and down and up and down and up and down. Like I've just been going up and down the stairs for 5 minutes. Just been exercising. It sounds insanely silly, but if you can get more movement in your day, that's better than feeling guilty about, oh geez, I just paid for a gym membership and I haven't even gone. So now I've just wasted my money. Guilt, guilt, guilt. Get away from that guilt, get it more fun, get it more inspiring, get it more validating. Like I feel good when I do my exercise or my movement. I have a mat down the hallway with some hand weights and ball and bands, so if I feel like doing it, I'm not going to do it. No problem. 2 days ago, it was the most beautiful day here in Seattle. And when we see the sun, believe me, everyone rushes outside. I did not rush outside because I was busy and something else was going on. I didn't feel guilty like, oh my gosh, I didn't go for my walk. Let's just make it work for you. Exercise will help in so many ways. By the way, for hot flashes, it's really helpful. Although many women will get actually more hot flashes when they're exercising. So there's kind of a downside. Just get your ice water and think about cooling fans or cool cotton and light clothing. But exercise is probably one of the most important things that's kind of misinterpreted as, oh, I have to follow the American Heart Association and do 120 minutes of vigorous activity. And I have to make sure I do this every week. And don't make it shoulda, coulda, woulda. Make it fit your day, because all of us, we women, have busy days.
Great advice. I do like the concept of movement versus exercise. And I also have many stairs. So if I'm having a day cleaning, I consider that my exercise, because the up and down. I do want to leave some time for anyone who has questions. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. And this may be a big question, but how does menopause affect women of color differently? And what approaches should they do? How should they approach it?
Great question. And I would say that so much more research is ongoing as we speak and is necessary in this field. So I hope that my answers will change over time. We've seen a lot of trends, some concrete examples. So my husband's Asian, my daughter's half me, Caucasian, half Asian. She's young, so she's long ways from menopause. But Asian women often will have fewer hot flashes. In our country, African-American Black women will have more hot flashes. Women in the Philippines, there was one study, may have more body aches, muscle aches and pains. So these are kind of broad generalizations. I hesitate to say all those things because I believe that's still very individualized, but I'm very appreciative of that question because we all go through this differently. And there could be cultural changes. There could be genetic factors at work. There absolutely could be dietary things that impact, maybe. Like I love tofu and soy products and edamame and all that. So maybe culturally, in terms of nutritionally what people take in, or maybe as someone who's having too much junk food, So there are lifestyle factors, the access to good nutrition or access to the ability or the time to move and to exercise and to feel validated in that area. So, I mean, there's all that interplay, socioeconomic. So my answer is a bit kind of all over the map, but the answer truly is yes. There are differences in different cultural and different heritage and different, BIPOC community and so forth. I think that there are opportunities to learn a lot more and actually, here's a thought, have patients educate their doctor about what they're going through. It gets kind of full circle back to communicating and having someone listen to you. So you're not a statistic. You are an individual as a patient when you're coming into the room. And your doctor may have a certain study in mind or a certain kind of, demographics experience in mind. Well, you want advice tailored to you. It's nice to talk about generic stuff, but you really want it tailored to you. So the more information you can share, the better off I believe your doctor can respond to that and should respond to that and should respect those things that are happening to you as a unique individual.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think a conversation that seems to be coming up is a frustration with the care that women receive in general, and in particular related to menopause. And maybe you could give us like a script or a way to talk to our doctors. And also, is this a conversation we should be having with our GP, or should it be with the OBGYN? And what happens if you're being shuffled in between the two of them and no one wants to, either doesn't have the time to listen to you or doesn't have the background to listen to you?
Yeah, well, sadly, all of that exists everywhere. I think obviously in rural communities, it's probably a lot more difficult because you don't have a choice. I live in a city, and so there are choices about where I can go. So that is very much a privilege that I have. I feel that some people don't have the financial wherewithal to get healthcare or medical care insurance I'm talking about that can cover them in certain places. So there's a whole kind of, bigger picture discussion that's the tip of the iceberg. But I believe that, again, it comes back to if you feel like your physician is not listening to you. And because I'm an internist, I've been doing primary care my entire career. I believe primary care is where it's at. But many women will give up because their primary care doctor doesn't have the time or perhaps the interest, or just gave them the same shtick that they already know. It's like, well, geez, I've been to that website. It didn't help me. That's why I'm here. Thank you very much. Not so, so then they get frustrated, like you say. And I feel that if they could feel like, well, there's an option. I would like you to see so-and-so, and that's a really good OBGYN who has maybe a little more background in a discussion about hormones, or background about discussion about things that aren't hormones. And so finding the right person, threading that needle is key. Again, I realize that not everyone has that choice. But really, one tip I think that no matter whom you see is important is it's so hard when you are personally overwhelmed by all these things. How can you possibly condense all of your issues into this nice little, 2-minute nugget that you put out when you have a 10-minute visit? I mean, it's like it's impossible. So why don't you pick off the top 2 or 3 things that you think are really important that you don't want to walk out that door and not have it spoken about? Maybe one of those, maybe the most embarrassing thing is what you don't want to talk about, but you really want to talk about. Maybe it's about changes in your urinary system, or maybe it's about vaginal dryness, or maybe sex is painful. I mean, all those things like, oh gosh, I'm talking about this, maybe you put that on the top 3, and that you preface by saying like, well, this is hard for me to talk about, but I really want to talk about it today. And I really hope we can get to it before the end of our visit. So kind of preface that visit. Hopefully it's physically a little more time. And this way you'll get to it. And I hope that you'll be listened to. So make a list, but keep it short for that reason, because otherwise, it's going to get buried. And if you have 20 things you're going to talk about, maybe that's number 17, you're never going to get to it. And then another caveat, honestly, and this is going to sound really deserving to my profession, is if you're not satisfied, switch doctors. It doesn't mean you have to be doctor shopping all the time, because then, oh my gosh, you don't want to be labeled as someone who's, difficult to navigate or difficult to speak to. But I had many patients that came to me frustrated because their previous physician, who I consider a wonderful, nice person, a great colleague, a really fine doctor, it just wasn't a match. So not all of us have the right match. So you have to move on.
That's great. And also, certain doctors at certain times of your life, like you could have had an OBGYN that was a great OB, but not great later in life. So it's sometimes it's hard to make the switch, but it may behoove us to do that. We do have a question from Suzanne. This is a great question. Suzanne, I wonder if you've been reading the same magazine that I've been reading. What is the difference between traditional hormone therapy and bioavailable hormone therapy?
So bioidentical hormones versus traditional hormones, a lot of that is just a little bit in terms of semantics, in terms of words. So if something is FDA approved and valid for Western medicine physicians to prescribe, then that gets into our bucket of things that we can prescribe, and we think about things like estradiol or progesterone, prometrium. The bioidentical part means that the hormones are essentially mimicking or very similar, the same as what our body would have been or is trying to or is naturally producing. And so that's different than like way back in 2002-ish, whenever the Women's Health Initiative data came out. Remember, it was looking at women who are 50 and much older, and they used Premarin, which is a drug that's been for a million years since I last prescribed that. It was derived from the urine of pregnant horses. So like, holy cow, that's definitely not bioidentical. So we fortunately are able to access legitimate medications that work. Estradiol and prometrium are two great examples. The slippery slope is this kind of where I pause, because I don't want to offend anybody, is that the less controlled they are, the less evidence-based, science-backed data based they are, that's where we get into the mud. And I'm really speaking to things that are compounded. So there are a lot of women who get compounded creams and ointments and balms or salves, and they rub it on body parts, and they feel better and it works. Well, so I'm not going to stand up here in my soapbox and say, well, don't use that. If it works, it works. But on the flip side, the compounding industry is not regulated, and you can get into deep water with products. God, you can get anything on the internet nowadays. You get products that are not really what you think they are, and in fact, they might even be harmful. Hence, the FDA has not cleared them. So I think that sticking to some of those basic principles of where you're getting your information from is key, and how you're getting if it is a prescription or your access to medications. So the bioidentical hormones are great, but be careful when it comes to the whole compounding industry, because sometimes it can be helpful, but remember, big money maker.
Thank you. I saw an advertisement that said bioidentical, and I wasn't really sure what that means. So that would not be FDA science-backed, doctor approved. That's a little more.
Well, no, bioidentical hormones, I mean, to all practical purposes, are the prescriptions I mentioned that are
okay.
Estradiol and prometrium, as opposed to the original ones way back when, like Prempro and Premarin and so forth.
Okay.
But unfortunately, it bleeds in that whole category of others that everyone is this big. I can understand your question. This big umbrella, like, oh, they're bioidentical, like just that it's like a buzzword. What does it really mean? It doesn't mean off the beaten trail supplements that aren't FDA approved. It just means that they are mimicking or basically as identical as possible to the hormones that our bodies naturally produce.
Okay, and we have one last question. How many years do women usually have hot flashes from menopause?
Oh, you're not going to like my answer. It could be 0. Yay, that wasn't me. It could be 10, or it could be a lifetime. Now, without being Debbie Downer, I will say that most women who are going to have hot flashes or are having hot flashes will see it kind of peter out over time, or they get better at dealing with them or predicting them or reducing them and making them less of an issue. So I still have hot flashes. I went through menopause a while ago, but except like even right now, who cares? I'm giving a public health talk. You know what? I'm wearing a light top. It's no problem. Maybe when I was first going through this, I think like, oh my God, I'm gonna be sweaty and this is terrible. So you kind of adjust to it over time. I think what's hard is when it's at night. So the night sweats, especially if they're drenching your bed and you're sopping wet, and then you get freezing cold because you're wet. And it's just like, it's that endless cycle. That's a little harder to manage. So night sweats, hot flashes often are in the first couple of years as you're transitioning into perimenopause and certainly into postmenopause. There are many women who are having hot flashes well into their 70s. I can remember, because I was prescribing at the time when the Women's Health Initiative data first came out in the early 2000s. And women all over the planet, boom, they all stopped their hormones. Well, guess what? They're all calling me because they're going crazy. Why am I like, go back on your hormones. So, the moral of the story is there's no prediction. This could be the way it's going to be, but it gets a lot easier and it becomes less of an issue in terms of just your lifestyle. And some women actually don't have a whole lot of trouble with hot flashes, and it also goes away very quickly. So I gave you this, both ends of the spectrum answer.
Let's hope we're in that category then. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I please ask another question, because I wrote it in the chat, but I don't see it now.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So UTI and yeast infection in vagina, I used to suffer it before. With the menopause, is it getting worse or better? I don't know, because one doctor says it's getting better, the UTI and the yeast infection. The other says it will get worse. So,
Dahlia, I am so glad you brought that question up, and I'll be brief because I know we're coming to the end of our time. I think this topic, well, we should have done it 20 minutes ago, is super important. And I think that women will notice a lot of things I just talked about, like night sweats and hot flashes and all those things, but they won't really know what's going on down there, right? Until they're into menopause. And so they realize, like, oh my God, it is so dry down there. And so we get vaginal atrophy, we get dryness that definitely impacts many women's susceptibility to urinary tract infections, whether or not they're sexually active. And so you're absolutely right. It actually, for someone, it gets profoundly worse. There's probably a whole hour talk I can give on that subject. Newer data, back to this whole microbiome, there's some really cool stuff coming in terms of, vaginal preparations. But that's probably one of the best, thinking about advertising hormones, that's probably the best use of topical estrogen is vaginal estrogen, where you either insert or you put in the very outer edge of the labia, because that can profoundly improve not just the sensations, but the susceptibility for urinary tract infections and discomfort. So stay tuned for more. I have a book coming out called The Menopause Menu. You get some cool information, but that's an excellent question. So thank you.
And also about the yeast infection, the same answer, also getting worse.
That would probably be a different answer. So I'm going to have to punch that to a different day.
Okay. And do you know Revari instead of the estradiol gel, Revari for lubricant? Will you recommend, or?
Why don't you put that in the chat, because you were a little garbled and I couldn't hear your question. But if you put that in the chat, we'll get a chance to connect afterwards.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful, so informative and much needed. And I hope we can have you back again when you have your book.
I'd be delighted to come back. And I just wanted to say thank you to you, Allie, and also to Long Beach Public Library for honoring this topic and making it kind of coming to the forefront. We need more of this. So thank you.
And I hope everyone that was listening will spread this information to their friends and family. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, the question was Reverie, R-E-V-A-R-E-E.
Oh yeah, it's a certain product. We can stop the recording if you want.
Okay.
We don't have another fucking movie. What do you want?